Thank you all for being here today. I want to make sure that I mention, because every time I practice, sometimes I mention who I went out to the site with and sometimes I don't. So just in case I forget. We have been working on this partnership with the site of Pineland in Southwest Florida, and we had the incredible opportunity to actually go out and test out the HMS Florida forms at Pineland. So I went out with my director, Sarah Ayers-Rigsby, and my colleague, Jennifer Green. So they will be featured in multiple pictures, and I want to make sure that I say both of your names before I start. All right, so I'm going to give you a little overview of South Florida and Southwest Florida and why it's such an amazing place to work. And then I'm going to focus in on Pineland and the work that we've been doing there. All right, here we go. So when we talk about Southwest Florida, of course, as with the rest of the state, we're very concerned about sea level rise. So when we look at a 1 foot rise, we already are seeing pretty significant effects to our coastal region. And then once we get to a 6 foot sea level rise, you can see that most of our coastal cities are at least partially flooded, if not completely flooded. So when we're talking about archaeology in this area, in just this little pop-out map that I have, there are 102 archaeological or cultural sites in this little area. So when we expand that into all of Southwest Florida, we're talking about a huge impact on our cultural sites in the region. However, we have some really great things about working in Southwest Florida. I have a 22% jump in my population every winter. So these snowbirds are wonderful, dedicated volunteers. Many of the sites in Southwest Florida are run on volunteer labor. And there's also a focus on conservation already in Southwest Florida. So talking about the archaeology very, very briefly, we have inland and coastal sites. We have incredible wood preservation. We have palm fiber fishing nets that have survived 1,000 years in the ground. And a lot of that is because of the environmental stability that we have right now at some of these wet sites that are providing this preservation. So what I want to focus on today is the site of Pineland. So we are on Pine Island, is that larger island, and Pineland is where the arrow is right there on the side. And this is managed by the Randall Research Center. So we've been working very hard to create this partnership with Pineland and with the Randall Research Center and the scientists there. So the current research regime that's been going on has been there for almost 30 years. And what's really exciting and interesting is that since the beginning of this research project, they have been focusing on humans and the environment. So they've been talking about sea level and how sea level is affecting people at this site since they began. If we look at this LIDAR elevation map, we can see how incredibly flat most of this site is, with a few very obvious exceptions. And I want you to understand that pretty much this entire map has been engineered by humans. So we have these two huge mound complexes and that are bisected by a hand-dug canal. So when we talk about sea level rise at Pineland, right now it's fairly stable, and even with a 2 foot rise, we're still pretty stable as long as there's no storm activity. But once we get to a 6 foot rise, the entire site is inundated with water, again with the exception of those two nice tall mounds. The reason that we wanted to partner with Pineland are many. So a few of those are the dedicated volunteer base that they have that really help run the site. The fact that it's an active research site, we get the opportunity to work with organizations like the Florida Museum of Natural History, the Randall Research Center, and the Calusa Land Trust. So what we did, our objectives when we went out to the site, were to meet with the primary researchers. So we had a meeting with Bill Marquardt and Karen Walker and Ed Chapin, who is part of the Calusa Land Trust. And we wanted to identify and let them know how HMS Florida could help them in the research that they're already doing. And we are really using this as a way to create a working relationship with Pineland and with those researchers. So we went out, we met with the researchers, and the three of us went and actually did our HMS forms on 3 different spots in this site: Randall Mound, Old Mound, and the pond. So you can see a picture, the top picture here is the top of Randall Mound, and the bottom picture was the bottom of Randall Mound. This is that Old Mound, which is right next to a street, as you can see. So it's interesting to think about the different threats to this particular site being street side. And that street is not only acting as a barrier from the ocean, but it's also obviously, carrying people, carrying traffic, and things like that. So finally, we went to the pond, which is again a fairly stable site. There's no, coastal activity at this pond, But even just on this pond, we looked at the ground right by our feet, and we have this lovely little columella tool that we found. So these are some of the things that we were finding. So in contrast to this pretty stable site at Pineland proper, we also went up to the north side of Pine Island to a site called Calusa Island. So Karen Walker has known about this site. They've known about the site pretty much the entire time that they've been there. And they're very, very worried about the site. It is being actively washed away. So Karen Walker put into place her own monitoring program after the SAAs this year. It's a very in-depth form. They're doing much, much more than we have the capacity to do with HMS Florida, so I think it's kind of interesting to look at both. So this is a picture of the midden that is being actively washed into the ocean, and the form that Karen Walker uses. So what she did is she put semi-permanent markers, so rebar, along the edge of this midden. So not only can you measure from the rebar and look at how far in the midden is coming, but you can also talk about where artifacts are coming from. They have curation space that they can actually collect artifacts and things like that. So this is a really interesting site that they're in monitoring program. So the three of us went and we did a pedestrian survey. We collected data the way that Karen Walker prescribed, and we did the measurements of the midden edge. So this is what our day looked like, is this image on the right. So looking for shell tools in a shell midden. There's actually a columella tool in there next to my pen. And this is important because this is the kind of site that we need to be documenting. And this is what HMS Florida can do, is identify these sites that are being actively eroded. And I think that working with the team from Pineland and working with Karen Walker can add a really nice kind of baseline for all of the information that they're gathering and what we're gathering also with the HMS Florida forms. So moving forward with Pineland, we are going to hold some HMS trainings at the site, and we want to make sure that we are understanding what we're losing and the sites that we need to be able to prioritize as we move forward in the Southwest region. Thank you very much.